Now it's again time for a little chat with questions hopefully from the audience too. Let's invite Jean-Francois Soussana to join us too, remotely. Welcome.
Hello.
Nice to see you. And now, dear audience, one more time, what would you like to ask or say about soil and mitigating climate change? Now is your chance. We have room for a few questions. But first, I'd like to ask both Jean-Francois and Jari, how long will it take until scientific verification provides a basis for agricultural and climate policy instruments and a possible carbon credit market? When will this happen? Jean-Francois first.
Yes, thank you for this important question. We can see that this is a roadblock in the global effort for sequestering carbon in soils and in this way acting for climate and acting also for food security. And we are deploying efforts in several countries in Europe and elsewhere. And I should say that in some countries there are already some successful efforts with carbon credits, like in Australia. There is a soil carbon scheme where the farmers get paid for long-term actions for sequestering carbon. And in Europe, we are seeing some pilots, I would say. And it's interesting to note that there are some national systems, like in a few countries, like in France, we have a national labeling, which is useful for paying farmers for soil carbon. However, the methods are really not internationally well developed, and that was really nicely introduced by Jari. And that's why we are placing this effort on a really large-scale system that would provide an international standard on verifying soil carbon. So you can see that my answer is yes, we have a few existing systems to monitor, verify soil carbon, but we need to deploy them at scale. And to do so, we think we need an international system. When can we get there? I think it can take about 5 years.
Thank you. That's a pretty concrete answer already. Jari, what's your estimate? How does this sound? What would you like to add?
Yeah, hello, nice to meet you virtually. Yeah, so
hello,
I'll just add to that maybe that I agree what Jean-Francois was saying, and then I also my estimate would also be like something like a few years, 5 years. We are not further than that from that stage, and I'm thinking that if from like a more technical perspective, the few things that I want to mention is that when we started in Carbon Action to build this system that I just presented, we like. 2 years, 3 years ago, we really didn't have a clear idea on what kind of system to start to build. And then when we made this decision, and it has appeared to be a good decision we made, after that, it has been mainly sort of a work of a technical nature, so that we know what we're doing, because then it was very difficult when you know that you are supposed to be doing something, but you don't know exactly what. So now we are so it's just a matter of doing now. I think that's one point that I want to bring here. And then the other thing that I want to bring here is this kind of operational verification methodology versus the kind of scientific development. What we have been trying to do in the Carbon Action is that we are doing like the best of science that we can do, and I don't think that anything less will be acceptable in this growing carbon market in the future. That is why we have chosen this approach. But at the same time, we have been sort of very interested and all the time having an operational version for the stakeholders, so that we can start exploring this with piloting. So that is really a kind of, if we could just go to our laboratory and say we will come back in 5 years with a final method, that's not the way to go, I think. So I think these are the comments that I would bring here, but I agree with Jean-Francois that 5 years, a few years is something that the estimate.
That's encouraging. I have a question from the chat for Jari, which actually I think kind of you already got into a bit here, but I'll ask it still. In Finland, are you also looking at action-based results such as changing practices for the MRVs rather than just results-based, i.e. how much carbon is sequestered? Is there potential for hybrid action and results-based MRVs? Jari.
Yeah, well, I think there are maybe kind of two things in that question now is that yes, when we're developing this verification methodology, we are very well aware, and it's critical that the system is able to simulate the impacts of the different actions, whether that's like the methods of use in regenerative agriculture. So it needs to be able to account for those, because that is why we've built that for the most part. But then I think that the answer to that question is that this is a kind of along the line which has been popped up recently, maybe during the spring more and more often, is that, and I have been thinking that maybe we could use our verification methodology in order to produce these kind of response curves for different, or response kind of surfaces for different actions, and those then could be used for this to estimate the impact of the different actions at this stage, when the kind of the calculation using this verification methodology is possible, but it takes some, like technical skills that not everybody is able to have.
Sounds good to actually have impact at the core all the time. Another question, mainly for Jean-Francois Soussana. As a huge amount of carbon is found in seas and water bodies, and its cycling process is global, although 3.7% of carbon might be found in soil, could sequestering carbon in the soil alone mitigate climate change or carbon evolution to the atmosphere?
Yes, thank you. Well, in theory, it could, at least to some extent, or even a large extent, but in practice, no, it is not really possible. Why do I say this? Because you rightly said that there is a huge reservoir of carbon in the soils, actually about 3 times more carbon in the organic matter of soils than in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So you can understand that even a small change in this large reservoir could actually draw down the CO2. But when this is theory, but when we go into practice, we realize that this depends on the actions of so many farmers, so many people managing land, that it is almost impossible to hope that they would all coordinate actions to have an effect at global scale on the atmosphere, or at least a very large effect. So we are left with more the practical development of those options that will gradually take place and will have an impact on the atmosphere, but not to the extent that we could foresee in the theory when starting to think about that issue.
Thank you. Then a question for both of you from the chat. What tools are put in place to avoid that parameters for carbon sequestration calculation and carbon credit market do not become instrumentalized by neoliberal capital-driven purposes, which might end up losing effectivity in terms of ecological impact? So what can we do to avoid so that these calculations and the credit market won't just be sort of instrumentalized in capital-driven purposes? Which one of you would like to start?
Maybe Jean-Francois, if you could start, because that's quite a bit related to what you were presenting in your presentation, Adam. Okay.
Thank you, Jari. Yes, well, as you see, first of all, we need to have not only accounting of soil carbon, but also accounting of the full greenhouse gas budget. Otherwise, the net effect on climate would not be granted. Second, we also need to be looking into side effects of those options, possibly side effects on biodiversity, side effects on pesticide use, such things. And then there are also some issues about who will get the added value. Will it be the farmers? Will it be large corporates? And this is not for sure. And there are some NGOs which fear that in developing countries we may see development of large-scale carbon credit projects that could actually hurt the rights of the local farmers, the local communities. So as any innovation, we cannot say that it is not without risks, that those risks need to be controlled and debated. And that's why it is also important to have international fora where this can happen. Maybe I can mention that there is the Global Soil Partnership, which is also one of those arenas where such things are debated.
Jari, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just say that this is like this soil at risk symposium. This is an example that how it's important to acknowledge the different environmental impacts, not just only looking at the carbon here, essentially the biodiversity, for example. And then another thing which I think is essential is that this is kind of done in a kind of a multidisciplinary context also, so that we have the stakeholders like the farmers and the food companies and the like investors and stuff like that in the group doing this. And this is also something that we have been doing in this in our carbon action initiative. And then maybe finally is that that is why I tried to emphasize many times the kind of the transparency and credibility of the approach that is used to evaluate carbon and other climate impacts, because that is I think the scientist kind of what scientists gives to the process is that the best of knowledge transparently sort of documented and disseminated to those who make the decisions.
Thank you so much. Perhaps one last question, and I think this might go to both of you. This is directed at Jari, but I think Jean-Francois addressed this a bit in his own talk as well. Jussi Knapi asks, why does nearly every country have their own system to analyze and follow carbon cycling? This makes it very difficult to proceed in incoming and already running carbon trade systems. Shouldn't we have a common ground with these, international or national? Jari, perhaps you can start, and then perhaps Jean-Francois can add to that.
Yeah, well, my view is that there's like it's I would say that it's first of all quite unrealistic that we would have just one system in the world. We have seen this in different other like modeling or similar efforts or exercises earlier. That and certainly there is benefit to that having different groups working on the same topic and bringing their own ideas, because that then makes it possible for others to like exchange of ideas and also to compare the different measurements. Well, for example, the Earth system modeling development, which is used to make a climate change predictions. That's an example of that we have many climate Earth system models, and then what the results we get from them represents the uncertainty that the humankind has in climate change forecasts or predictions. So I mean that's kind of there is an advantage to that. But then I also at the same time I want to emphasize that this is also isn't the international collaboration is another like a very important aspect of that. So that I think that for example like the open science principles that we are following is that we think is an advantage to this field, that when we make measurements and when we make modeling, we make our data and like knowledge available to everybody, and then we're working in this open science community. We also get the ideas from the others. So I think that's an effective way of increasing the knowledge. These are maybe the first thoughts that come to my mind.
Excellent thoughts. Jean-Francois, would you like to add to this?
Yes, thank you. So I certainly agree with Jari about the role of diversity of approaches in science and in getting the best out of science for the applications. But then I should say that the demand by stakeholders is to have some standards. For instance, if you talk to corporates that work across continents, actually they may work in different countries, also in different continents, they tell you that it is very difficult for them to work with different standards that are not exactly the same in different countries. So they would like to see a sort of an international standard. However, the way to make this compatible would be to create, with the help of remote sensing, a global product that would be, let's say, the international standard with the associated uncertainties, that's essential, and then to have possibilities in each country, possibly with also some of the companies, to have their own products that would be based on the data from that international standard and presumably on the same approach, but could use some more advanced data sources that would be, for instance, in Europe with finer knowledge of the agricultural practice and some of the other world regions and so on. So I think this sort of approach, it's a bit similar to what IPCC has with, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where tier 3 is more advanced than tier 1, and tier 1 is the sort of default approach you can use worldwide. I think that's where we could develop, and that's why we talk with some of the, let's say, space agencies like ESA, like NASA, Harvest, and so on this perspective. But certainly we need to have in the international consortium, research consortium, all the groups, like your group, Jari, that develop their approaches, and in order to create that international standard.
May I? Yeah, I just want to say that I didn't get misunderstood as exactly like, so I didn't mean that we would have everybody having their own rules, but we're having like a common rules and everybody then contributing within these rules with their own approaches. That is what I meant. And this kind of international standards is a very important component of this. And I also like very much your like reference to these IPCC good practice guidelines and good practice to the instructions for the greenhouse gas inventories. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for these rather inspiring visions of the future and ideas to make this happen. Thank you so much, Jean-Francois Soussana. Thank you so much, Jari Liski, for the great discussion. Thank you.